So, welcome to, geez, what is it? Episode 15, I think. Every person wants liberty. What was I thinking when I came up with that? Cat's over there. I'm going to be doodling while I do this. Um, First of all, a little message for the new viewers. New viewers, I have a little thing with my old viewers, some of them naturally, not all, about the fact that I claim I'm not here to convince anybody. And I am here to share what I believe and how I came to believe it. You could say why I believe it, but maybe it's just how I ended up believing it. Anything I can think of. Oh, why do I like pickles? Oh, my grandma liked pickles, and so I tried a lot of pickles, and I ended up liking them. Crazy. Um, so, people have had different attitudes about whether that's a legit thing. You sure seem like you're trying to convince us when you argue with us. I'm like, hey, when you challenge ideas and so-called argue the ideas, this is a good way to highlight the differences and figure out what the differences are. You know, compare and contrast. Um, So I want to know other people's positions and how they got there. That's what I think we're doing. And I still think that. But I did have a thought. And that's a conflict as well because, there's been certain people, some who are no longer with us directly in the conversation, who thought that, hey, if you like and care for people, you should try to convince them. Ooh, triangles. I got a good triangle thing I just did here. Kind of a fractal. I don't know if I'm going to remember that. I thought that was kind of convincing. Uh, but, to me it was, I don't know, is ironic the right word? Because, I always thought I was doing people a favor, not trying to convince them, and just trying to share ideas. Because I believe people convince themselves, really. But I admit I do things that are like argumentation, giving my argument. You tell me, here's what I think, and here's why I believe it. And I go, what about this? What about that? Um, and I guess part of it is that it can bug people because I don't necessarily believe this and that. I'm just saying, what's your reaction to these obvious comments on your position? People have a wide variety of reactions to that. Not all bad, but of course, mostly bad. So I was thinking about this and I was thinking, you know what? There is this other way of looking at it. I do have a perspective on what I'm doing that's separate um, from some of how I view what I'm doing. Meaning this, that I have a perspective of what I'm doing that suits my pursuits that I don't think necessarily, matches a reality. So when I'm considering like, hey, why are people so hesitant and appear frightened in things? Um, I don't necessarily take, my perspective on what's going on into account. It's kind of like this. If you were going to go take, if I was going to go take, a walk in the woods, a park, but say, a big park like a state park or a national park with, trails miles long. So I'm taking a big long hike. And I go out with my backpack And in my mind, I'm taking a big adventure. It's going to be a huge thing. I'm going to meet new persons, personalities, you know, and it's going to be cool. Going to have a little bit of a life experience. Um, and I do. I run into a dragonfly and a bug I've never seen before and stuff. You know what I mean? So my perspective is like, hey, I had a little, an adventure, but I know it's a little adventure. And if you ask me, I'd say it's a little adventure. But when I'm going out to it, I don't think of it as little. I like, what am I going to see today? I might see one of those seeds drop from a tree, the helicopter seeds. I'm like, oh, that's cool, and whatever. I'm just so open to it. It's like I'm helping it be positive by, accepting the moment or however you want to put this thing. And it's just an example. The point here for the metaphor is that I don't really think that it's some amazing adventure in any, well, of course not in an objective sense because there is no such thing, but in any intersubjective or for other people. But the closest I would think it was for other people is that when you take a walk, do it like that. Go ahead and be in a little tiny children's story about an adventurous walk. Use your imagination and stuff. That might be good. I like to do it. Now, here's my doodle so far. So the perspective that I have that is similar to, convincing is that I do entertain this idea that I'm influencing people. And my idea on influencing is that you can't not influence. If you interact with something, then you're influencing it. Trying to influence in a good way is, of course, difficult. Um, so many factors in, what is good and kind of can you prove that it was good and whatnot. I ended up with a little cross in here, a little Christian cross. What's that all about? Thinking of you guys, I guess. So you're going to influence whether you want to or not, and so you have to think about your influence. And here I take some advice going back to when I was in my 20s or maybe even teens. I don't want to mention the philosopher because this is my interpretation of what they said, but I took them to be claiming to be saying, well, I'll get that in a second. Let's see this for a second. Okay, great. I took them to be saying that they were hard to understand on purpose because it's better to be not understood, right, than misunderstood. So if you're misunderstood, there could be people that end up forming some sort of a cult or a religion or not so much either of those things, but a fanatic group, right? Cult, religion might be examples of those, but maybe not in the case of, maybe not all religions are fanatics. Maybe it's just a tendency. But so if you're hard to understand, then what's going to happen is a lot of different people are going to have different interpretations, and it's impossible for people to become a bunch of fanatics, and at least an individual might, but no group is going to be able to form in your name and sort of misinterpret, your point. Because if you're an anti-fanatical philosopher that's like, hey, I'm saying don't be fanatics, then, it'd be useful to know how not to be perverted and subverted. Because, in our society, how many times does it seem like things are perverted and subverted? war in Christ's name, but you could say, oh, well, Christ said this or that. Well, I mean, I'm not a Christian, I'm an atheist, so um, it still seems to me that, Christians have a lot of trouble with that message that's in there. So how do I try to influence? Is I try to put positive information out there that is independent of me. I don't talk a lot about uh, things that somehow would benefit me. I don't talk about programming, much where, well, I guess it would have to benefit me because that's something that's, personal to my way of life or whatever. Um, I think just information that's straightforward. It does confuse people, and again, I think that that's a good thing. In my case, not everybody would want to do that. Um, I put points and counterpoints in things, but it's not to confuse people. It's just that when you try to tell your ideas to other people, especially if you think a lot and you got all these ideas and there's all these details from your perspective, um, it's complicated and it's hard to explain. You have to decide how to simplify it or what you're going to do with that. And the fact that I think it's okay to be confusing, just allows me not to simplify it too much because there's a benefit, because you might be hard to understand, but you can also be harder to misunderstand. Now, people can always misunderstand you on purpose, so to speak. I don't think that's really possible to do honestly, but people pretend that they do, and since they fool themselves into thinking they misunderstand you and pretend to misunderstand, like your idea is so weird it can't even possibly exist. That's just all rhetoric and game playing. Um, and basically, I think that though, nothing is 100% uh, like, oh, you can always do it. I do think that it's possible, is the point, to be both hard to understand, where that goes with harder to misunderstand. And it might be that nobody understands you, therefore. And that'd be fine. And the information that goes out there can still be a positive influence, being honest information that then has an influence. And I'm wondering if people like Gary and even Heichliday and so many others aren't bothered by the fact that, I state my opinion, I make my position totally clear, yet it's totally clear in the sense that it's like I don't hold anything back. But people are confused because I do these points and counterpoints, which arguably I'm totally fair for you guys to think that, well, that makes it unclear. And then in the end, that's the packet of information I want to get out because I want the influence to be a packet of agents and reagents. I see ideas as chemicals. So our ideas interact. So I send out, a full on cellular organism. It's hard for you to penetrate. It takes a while. It interacts with you in complicated ways. And I think maybe when that influences you, like I've been feeling bad that, I wrote that song about Gary, and because that's another thing. Here's a little asterisk. Um, this is going to be about North Korea in a bit. Um, the song I wrote about to Gary, or about Gary so long ago, was about, oh, I claimed I taught you about light. I taught you about life. I taught you what to do when you get uptight. That's advice you need quite a lot because you really get bothered when your collar gets hot. But I taught you about light because one of our first arguments was about the speed of light, and I thought he had accepted sort of what I'd said, but in reality, I think, you know, there's no way to confirm this is a, a factor of what I'm about to say. But, I wonder this influence, like making Gary wonder, wait a second, am I teaching him something? Am I influencing him about physics? And he hates to be influenced. So people hate to feel they did get that influence. When you send out a complete organism, well, it's a little bit like a virus. Maybe that's what people are reacting to. But to me, it's like, well, you're sending those out too, right? It's all even. We're all psychological biologists, aren't we? But maybe not. So, anyway, the point is, if you don't like this, then I'm not one of those people that say don't watch it. I watch plenty of things that I don't like. But, compartmentalize it into, compartmentalize? Message to someone. Compartmental. Anyway, compartmentalize it enough so that you just, you can analyze it. Take the little bacteria of ideas that I present to you and just put it in a little compartment and watch it in a little petri dish and just watch its behavior, and see if you want to learn from it or whatever. And it's nothing to be afraid of, I don't think. But then I also worry that maybe it is. So, consumer beware. I certainly don't want it to be harmful, but it's at this point, it's not at all clear I can promise that. But I don't see any reason that it should be. So, page is not yet full. All right, so the main subject of the day, episode 15. Now, welcome back all the viewers, including my loyal viewers, hate watching, love watching, curiosity watching, whichever. Short message. The rest of this won't take very long. I was talking to a guy about some politics, a colleague, but a colleague in the sense that he also owns his own business, and we haven't worked together that closely, but that's why we're in contact. He's a nice guy. Anyway, we were talking about, he was saying, what kind of system would we institute in North Korea if given the chance? And I was like, well, there's only one system you can institute given the chance, and that's democracy. He's like, well, but they might not be ready for democracy. Well, it doesn't matter if they're ready for democracy. Whatever system they want, like a monarchy, you're going to have to give them a democracy, which they can vote into the form that they do want. You can't impose a system on a country, on North Korea, that's just proven not to work. We've seen that the occupied nations don't have the same character as is developed after the occupation ends and they get self-rule again. Now, an example this is an example of an old idea that just won't go away, basically. But it will go away. But I mean that an old idea that hasn't got away, that's hanging around, that we should all be familiar with. When I was young, I would tell people things like, well, in Saudi Arabia, they don't let women drive. People, Saudi Arabia is why? Oh, well, people over there don't want to drive. They don't want their women to drive. They are women. And it's like, well, even if you asked, if Saudi Arabian women don't want it. It's like, yeah, I guess if you asked Saudi Arabian women, and just to make sure they're telling the truth, you have to ask them in front of a Saudi police officer. You know, Okay, how about just the women that do want to drive are allowed to drive? I mean, obviously, if you have to restrict something like that with a law, someone is getting restricted. So the whole idea of we don't want our women to be able to have freedom, that's just how our society is always bullshit. You know, ask a Saudi immigrant, do you think Saudi women should drive? Look, the North Koreans are a very, this is a little side note, uh, because basically, let's just take the racists. Here's the thing, North Korea and South Korea together are Koreans. They make up, if I recall correctly, I should have looked this up before the video, but if I recall correctly, they make up the largest, ethnic block, homogeneous, except for, of course, it's a very big gene pool, but a single, or a common, let's say, gene pool, the largest one in the world. And yet one of them is all into K-pop and mobile phones and technology, and the other one is a backward cultish dictatorship. So, for anybody that thinks racially, we know those differences are not racial. It's not a genetic predisposition. The North Koreans have not evolved into a state where they would reject democracy. We know from Germany, from every example where it's ever happened, um, that when exposed, we know from America, when immigrants come over here within a generation, the first, you bring over 14-year-olds, that's young enough, and for sure their kids are just Americans wanting K-pop, the American version of K-pop, the digital and the PlayStations, and in a way, I'm saying their ethics get fucked up. But the point is, everybody wants that kind of stuff. Everybody wants, the hedonistic and indulgent stuff, but also the freedoms to decide for themselves. And most people also decide to not become addicted hedonists and, and just use all of those pleasures and freedoms, to keep yourself sane and have a fun summer, not to never work or be unproductive or anything actually negative in any measurable way, right? So all people want to be free. We've seen this time and again. There is no system where, oh, they just don't want women to. Who? Who doesn't want women to drive? The women? Yeah, even women. Really, except for you don't want to just let the women drive that want to drive. Well, it's not for us to say. Well, look, here's the deal. It isn't for us to say. We do not get to create a specific government for North Korea or even for ourselves. It's a group endeavor that follows a process, right? Follows a process. And that is the process, however, that should always be followed. There is no culture that should get to tell modern humans how they get to be. Oh, that's how they want it to be. They don't want to be free. It doesn't even make sense. Everybody wants liberty. We should assume everybody wants liberty. And the only thing is, I don't want to go impose it on anybody. I don't believe we have a true enough democracy to even begin to want to impose it on other people. So that's a matter of humility. However, everybody is in the struggle to be free. And I join hands with everybody in North Korea that wants more freedom, everybody in the United States of America, everybody anywhere of any philosophical perspective where what they want freedom to do is different. If it doesn't harm anybody else, and even if it's open discussion, I endorse that idea of liberty. individuals need to have the liberty to make decisions and do their own thing and be given room, even if sometimes that means we have to move out of the way to help give them room. This is what we want to do for our human society, in my opinion. And everybody wants to be free. If North Korea had the chance to vote, I predict that they would end up being like South Korea in approximately like 5 years. It would be hard to tell the difference except for in the old people. Um, I mean, people were suggesting, and I like this guy, but it's kind of ridiculous to me, but maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. That people would want to hold on to the worship of the you know, the Kim Jongs. No, no. People want to be free. You can enslave a race of people for thousands of years, and thousands of years later, they're still fighting for their freedom. They might not have gotten it yet. They haven't forgotten, but they want it. All right, cheers, and that's just some information to disseminate out there. You don't have to understand it. Just think about it. Just share it. Say, hey, I heard this thing. I didn't really get it. Here's the details of it. And just pass it along. All right, cheers.